Hello and welcome back to Destination Disability Part 3. So before we get going on this one, a couple of little bits we're going to just quickly talk about. The first is that I've had some comments which have been really great, so thank you for that, keep them coming. What we have noticed though is obviously some people sort of looking at this and listening to this, it's kind of reawakened a little bit of their own trauma. You know, and I have mixed feelings on this. I personally think that that's a good thing because it allows you to explore it and unpack it. But having said that, that may not work for some people as well. So the key thing is to make sure you look after yourself, and you remember that I did that video, ABCs of mental health, and I'll put a link in this as well to that video. So just go back and explore that. There's some really good helpful tips in there to make sure you look after yourself. Also, we're going to be getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty stuff in this one, so I suppose just a little bit of a warning, you know, it might be a little bit graphic in places, so you know, feel free to go there if you're comfortable with that. Okay. Finally, there's going to be a few key things that I want to highlight as we go through this, which kind of dictated my my pathway through PTSD in the years to come. And you have to remember that when all this happened, I was 14 years of age. So I was essentially a child. So I didn't have that mature thinking process developed. All right, so just bear that in mind. Okay, so here we go. I mentioned last time that, you know, I had come round from the operation. I was totally blind, and I was in the situation where I was immobilised in a hospital bed. I had tubes coming out of everywhere, you know, tube coming out of my skull, you know, the drains and various things. So I was immobilised, so I couldn't do myself any harm at all. And that's really important as we kind of explore this piece. Obviously, being blind shuts down one of your senses. You know, one of your defences, if you like. So, and you know, and I was also incredibly frightened, wondering what was going on. I was also in a neurological ward, which was an adult ward, adult men's ward. So I wasn't in like a children's ward or anything like that, like you would be today. So there we go. One evening, a gentleman was brought in. Now, he was in a bad way. I don't remember exactly what the problem was. I think it might have been a car accident, but I really can't remember. And he was placed not in the bed opposite me, but to my right, one to my right, so more or less opposite me. Now, as I say, he was very, very distressed, and he was screaming. He was, you know, very agitated, but I just remember the screaming. And obviously the doctors and the nurses were hustling and bustling around and trying to quieten him down. You know, I could hear all this stuff going on, but obviously without the sight, couldn't see it, couldn't rationalise it, so incredibly frightened. And as a doctor later would explain to me, I was no different at that point to a soldier in the First World War in the trenches, listening to wounded men screaming in pain in no man's land. You know, I was no different. Trauma doesn't really care about the circumstances. So that was my situation. So I went from being frightened to being absolutely terrified. You know, I can't honestly explain the fear that I was feeling, but you know, it's that fear of death. So everybody will have heard of fight, flight and freeze, their body's natural responses. And I'm going to put a link in the description down below with a doctor explaining it much better than I can. But there's also an element to that called defensive rage, which I'm going to come on to essentially. So freezing, I was essentially frozen, wasn't I? But I wasn't like frozen with fear. I couldn't flee the situation, couldn't get away from it. So I had to soak it up. And this went on for a number of hours, and it would go through peaks and troughs. So the guy would settle for a little bit, then he'd start all the screaming again and what have we. And I was just lying there, terrified, soaking it all up. And at some point in the night, something inside me gave way. I feel I broke at that point. And this is where the defensive rage became a part of it, and the fighting became a part of it. Now, I couldn't physically get out of bed and fight, so the only thing I had at my disposal is my voice. So I started yelling and screaming back at this guy to, you know, shut up and die. I wasn't that polite, obviously, but you know, you get the picture. But I completely lost the plot. So it was the only thing I had. It was, as I say, what the doctor explains as defensive rage. And obviously nurses, doctors came around, tried to help me out, tried to settle me down, but I was beyond that. I'd completely lost the plot. And a little bit later on, this guy did actually die. And I remember as they wheeled his body out of the ward, I remember saying, "Oh, thank whatever for that. Perhaps we'll all get some sleep now." That sounds pretty poor, doesn't it? And it is. It is when you look at it from a logical point of view. But for me, it was utter relief. That situation had now finished. You know, and that is a point I want to highlight, because my very young brain put two and two together and thought, okay, so that fighting and that defensive rage worked for me. It solved that situation. That was really dangerous for what was to come in the years to come. So, you know, my brain learnt that lesson. And there I was. So that situation was gone. But he, you know, he would have the last laugh, so to speak, because I would have nightmares for years to come. And he would visit me in those nightmares and sit on the edge of my bed and scream at me. So such is the nature of PTSD. So in the next part, we're going to talk about the mechanical effects that the abscess had on me. So physically, what could I do, what couldn't I do, how had it affected my life, you know. So we're going to talk about that a little bit next time. So that was Destination Disability Part 3, and I will try and get another piece put out for you soon, because there will be a little bit of a gap of content. So you know, but hopefully you're enjoying these, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.